Continuing on with today's show and the next topic that we have on hand, or actually before I talk about Dre Greenlaw and him recalling the injury in the Super Bowl one last time on today's show, I will remind you guys if you have any questions or comments to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen. GSMCPodcast.net enables me to see your question pop up and I could read it on air, and that way I get your guys' perspective on anything I say or the topic that we have on hand on screen. It's a lot more engaging and it's a massive help for the show, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But in saying that, we'll go back and talk about the 49ers and their star linebacker, Dre Greenlaw. He spoke, at least for the first time that I've seen in this offseason, about the experience in the Super Bowl, his freak injury. If you don't remember, he was just on the sideline, sort of jumping up and down, trying to get hyped up to get back out there on the field. They have had a lot of success in that first half, stopping Patrick Mahomes, stopping Travis Kelce. He was getting himself amped up, and then you see him sort of collapse, grab the back of his calf, and you don't want to think it's an Achilles, but the way he was reacting, and then on the sidelines, he went back into the locker room. Of course, he tore his Achilles, and that really changed the momentum of this entire game because, like I mentioned, they were having success. He played 12 defensive snaps in that first half, and just to put it in perspective, he had 3 tackles in that first half. Kansas City had only had 3 first downs and 0 points up until that point in their first 3 possessions. 3 possessions also in a whole half is pretty crazy to think about for the Kansas City Chiefs especially. Travis Kelce only had 1 catch for 1 yard in that first half during that time that Dre Greenlaw was in the game. And just to put it more into perspective, after Dre Greenlaw gets hurt, of course it's not just on him to cover Travis Kelce, but after he goes out and he gets hurt, Travis Kelce finishes the entire game with 8 receptions and 92 yards. So some context there to show you how massive this loss was for Dre Greenlaw. And he talks about it, the idea of how things could have been differently if he stayed in the game. He didn't have the misfortune of tearing his Achilles. He said in an interview recently, I think it was just the energy that I was bringing. I wouldn't necessarily say I would have stopped Travis Kelce. He would have made some good plays and had good catches, did some good things, but I know I would have made some plays out there as well. And he described his injury, said he was confused at first. He was sort of hoping that somebody just stepped on the back of his foot. He described his right leg as being kind of dead. It felt kind of dead, sort of limp in that moment, and just describing that Achilles injury, I could only imagine it's an undescribable feeling of just anxiousness and almost fear to some point, because the defense is really just hitting a home run in that first half. They're stopping the Kansas City Chiefs. It's all going great. Their offense is looking good. And then he goes out. You're kind of hoping for the best and at the same time fearing for the worst at that time that you don't know the real diagnosis of it all. Unfortunately, he gets hurt, and then, the Kansas City Chiefs turn it on from then. They go on to win the Super Bowl, and it is just a gut-wrenching feeling, I'm sure, for him to know, to just have that uncertainty that we'll never know what could have happened if he stayed in the game, and how maybe they could have won the Super Bowl and got revenge on the Kansas City Chiefs for beating them in their previous meeting a few years ago. There was also that story that I brought up, or not that I brought up, but I talked about leading up into the Super Bowl about the 49ers practice field and how they voiced their frustration with it and just the softness of it, of their practice field at UNLV. It was just basically one layer of sod rolled over this artificial turf field. They complained about it. Kyle Shanahan brought it up a lot. It isn't a reason really to blame it on for Dre Greenlaw, tearing his Achilles. Not to say that it could have happened to everyone, but that is something that is worth pointing out because a lot of players criticize the NFL for not having artificial turf surfaces in some stadiums. They all want to play on natural grass. Obviously, it's better for their joints and just for them landing, making cuts, and stuff like that. It all benefits to be on natural grass. And not only is that something to keep in mind, but I think Kyle Shanahan also brought up that one of his assistant coaches, while jumping on the sidelines as well, that he also tore his Achilles. So very rare that you see both two people tear their Achilles just jumping up and down on this surface. But that was brought up to Dre Greenlaw, and how much did the practice field have to do with it? He said, "My right Achilles was already in pain that whole month, so I wouldn't say necessarily that the practice field was the cause of it." And you realize that, and you think, "Wow, a whole month!" Like, I didn't know Dre Greenlaw had been battling this for a whole month, but you look back, and he was dealing with this injury since Week 18 in that game that he missed to end the regular season against the Los Angeles Rams. He fought through that to play in the game against the Green Bay Packers. He had two crucial interceptions in that game, and also against the Detroit Lions, in which he played. They had a great defensive performance there in the second half to stifle the Detroit Lions offense. And you can see how important he is to this defense and how crucial he was in their playoff run. To have him not there, again, just shows, and it will always leave people wondering what could have been if he stayed in the game. And now he's going through all the rehab. He's 3 months into this rehab process to try and get back to playing football. He isn't expected back until mid-October. That is the sort of anticipated timeline for Dre Greenlaw to get back out there. Recently, General Manager John Lynch said he expects Greenlaw to start the season on the physically unable to perform list. So that would just mean that he would miss the first 4 games. If he is placed on the PUP list to start the year, he would have to miss a minimum of 4 games. How he heals and how his body adjusts, maybe he comes back sooner. That is a decision that they have to take, not soon, but before the season starts. So it'll all depend on Dre Greenlaw to see how his body recovers throughout this whole process. And just on that topic, expecting him to come back, I think the 49ers are talented enough to get by without him. They don't, not to say that they don't need him, because they would love to have him out there, but they have a lot of playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Fred Warner's out there, Travarius Ward as well. Javon Hargrave, another underrated defensive lineman for them. I think they'll do just fine to get by with him. They're not going to lose all these games. They might have some hiccups or be in closer games, but they could get by with Dre Greenlaw. And once he's back out there, they're going to continue this dominant stamp that they have on their entire NFC. I still expect them to be there in the end, but it is interesting to see these comments by Dre Greenlaw and just get his perspective on how he's feeling, and not only that, but also see how he feels about the Super Bowl, how much he thinks about it. That's also something he brought up. He said it goes as far as thinking back to the Super Bowl and sometimes shedding one tear or another on just that what if. It's killing him. I'm sure it's killing the rest of the 49ers to see Dre Greenlaw not be able to play. But I think this coming year, with barring any surprises with Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, I expect them again to be playing in January for a chance to go back to the Super Bowl. Wouldn't it be something if they made the Super Bowl again with the Kansas City Chiefs trying to three-peat? I think that would be cool, but again, a long time from that period, from that expected maybe another Super Bowl rematch. And in the meantime, we'll continue on with the rest of the show. One more topic coming up after this last break. Terrion Arnold, the first-round selection by the Detroit Lions, revealed recently in an interview how a coin toss really was the deciding factor in the Las Vegas Raiders' decision to draft Brock Bowers at 13. Then obviously Terrion Arnold goes later. Find out more on what he said and just my thoughts on it after the break. That is coming up in a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.